Good evening, everyone, from myself and Professor Toral, and welcome to Great Decisions 2021. It's not exactly the same as what we've been used to, but it's the next best thing to being able to get together and be together in the Balkansky room at Manitowoc Public Library. Hopefully you have your own snacks and you're comfortable and you're settled in, and looking forward to another great year of great decisions kicking off this evening. As always, I'll be making a few announcements before we get started. Just wanted to thank all the sponsors of the Great Decision Series this year: the League of Women Voters of Manitowoc County, the Manitowoc Public Library Foundation, the Manitowoc Public Library, the Lakeshore Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, and Lakeshore Pax Christi. So thank you to all those that are supporting this. I wanted to call your attention that if you want all the details of all the lectures and everyone who will be presenting the lectures, all you need to go to for Great Decisions 2021 is www.manitowoclibrary.org/great-decisions. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but that is definitely where you can find out all the information, and you can also download the pamphlet that you would typically get for Great Decisions. And that includes, of course, all the information about the Legacy Fund. Because even though we had to, adjust a little bit and dance a little bit this year to make Great Decisions come off exactly how we wanted it to, we're still aiming to make it a self-sustaining program, and your support means everything. So thank you to everyone who's already donated, but please consider donating if you have not, just so that this becomes a self-sustaining program. For those of you that are interested in getting the companion publication that comes along with it, with the Great Decision Series, there was a slight snafu this year where the Foreign Policy Institute never received our check, and it was mailed during the election time. So this isn't a political statement, but the mail got a little bit messy during that period. So the book should be arriving this week. Professor Toral didn't get his book yet either, so hopefully those will be arriving this week. If you would like to purchase one of those, they're still $15, and we're accepting cash and check only this year because we're just not running things with credit cards with the library being closed as it is now to the public. But what you would need to do is call 920-686-3010 and tell them you would like the companion publication that goes with Great Decisions. And that, of course, will be treated just like any other curbside pickup situation. So if you would like to pick up one of the companion publications, that again is 920-686-3010, and that those should be arriving later this week. And just wanted to mention there are a couple of programs that are coming up or going on right now that you might be interested in. The All Ages Winter Readathon is happening through March 6th at the library. Yeah, beat the winter blahs with books. It's pretty simple. And not only is reading fun, you also win prizes by doing this. So check that out on our website, www.manitowoclibrary.org. And don't forget to take advantage of curbside pickup. Just call 686-3010, and you can get all the materials that you could actually get in library. Hopefully, we'll be open again soon. But until that time, curbside pickup is the next best thing. And call that number, and you can get everything from books, DVDs, CDs, ukuleles, Wi-Fi hotspots, toys, games. There's just a myriad of things. Anything you can get, you can pretty much get through curbside pickup. So, with my announcements out of the way finally, I would like to turn things over to Professor Toral. I'm going to get his PowerPoint going. I'm actually not going to be doing an introduction like I normally would because Professor Toral worked that into his PowerPoint presentation. So 1 second and we will get started. All right, take it away, Professor Toral.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Gatsinski. It's really a great pleasure to be here talking to you online. It's not the same as being in person. I certainly miss that. Considering that you always pack the room and it's your very engaging audience, so I'm really missing that this year. I hope everybody is well. I hope everybody will continue to do well. It seems like we're starting to see the end of the light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully we'll all get there. So best wishes to you, your friends, family, everyone. Health is more important than ever. I also want to thank the sponsors for inviting me again this year. I think this was the last presentation I gave last year before COVID hit. So it's been a year. It's hard to believe. So I'm gonna be missing my relaxing drive through the tundra of Wisconsin on the way back to Beloit. But we have an exciting topic to discuss today. I hope that you will enjoy it as much as I did. For those of you who did not get the booklet, well, I probably nobody did. I did actually read the section on Brexit and the EU, and I will try to address the main points that are being raised there. So it's part of my presentation. I'll make a reference to that when I get to it. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see that thank you. That's my bio. So just to highlight a couple of things, my fields of research and interest include, in general, international relations and environmental studies, particularly political economy. I teach courses on the European Union, international law, international political economy, sustainability development, Latin America, Europe. So this is very much in line with what I do. So I'm also working on a few projects that also involve, Europe, Brexit, Latin America, the European Union. So very timely topic. I woke up with a cold, so you might see me do this from time to time. I apologize. I hope it's no COVID. Maybe it's a good thing that we're doing this online. I was fine until yesterday, and it's not that bad. Nothing different from other colds I've had in the past. So it probably won't get any worse than this, but it probably won't get better in a couple of days. So still feel strong. So don't worry unnecessarily. I think I'll survive this one. So if you go to the next slide, we're going to dive right into it. So these are some of the key questions that are being raised in the reading, in the book. When you get the booklet, you will see that the author, Harris Latif, a prominent EU British politics student, so is very interested on questions about Brexit. What caused Brexit? What led the United Kingdom to leave the European Union? So he tried to answer that question. He's also wondering why Scottish people voted differently. No single region of Scotland voted to leave. They all voted to remain, while a significant portion of England and Wales voted to stay. So that's the second research question that is being raised in the chapter. So I will be talking about that a little bit, and it will also be in your booklet. And the third question is, what is the impact of the departure of German Chancellor Angela Merkel at the end of her tenure as Chancellor of Germany? She served a very, very long time, a decade and a half. She's been a good Europeanist leader of the EU, and that raises a big question mark. I will talk a little bit about this, not so much discussed in the booklet. So when you get it, you'll see that Mr. Latif talks about the first and second question, not so much about the third, but I will fill you in on that. So let's go to the next slide. So this is the structure of my presentation. So I won't really spend a lot of time on this for you to see where I'm going, where I'm coming from. I'll start by introducing what is the European Union. I'm a social scientist, so we have definitions for everything. So I will start by highlighting that, why it was created. We'll then on talk about what it has achieved, what challenges it's facing, particularly today after Brexit. That's a major challenge. And then we'll talk a little bit about the future of the EU as discussed in the book. So let's dive into it. So a couple of definitions to get started. Europe, the concept of Europe in the social sciences has many different meanings. Europe can be defined as a political entity, if you define it as the EU. But in the context of today's presentation, I'm going to define Europe as a socially constructed political project. What Europe really is, what it means, what it should become, is really a set of ideas about the way that European people want to live their lives. And we're going to see that as my presentation goes. So keep that in mind. What Europe is a construction. It's a joint political project that the European people are negotiating, and it's always changing. With Brexit, it's clear that it will change. The second one is, within Europe, what is the European Union in particular? The European Union is a little bit more specific. The EU is really the result of a treaty. It's what we call an international organization. An international organization is a group of countries that decide to work together to achieve certain goals. And the EU is vested with powers that the member countries give it. And the EU has a few articles of agreement, and those powers are exercised by the EU by delegation from the countries. And the EU cannot overstep its bounds. Only what's written in those treaties is the EU allowed to do, and that is very important. So think about the EU as a club. Some people use the analogy of a club. When you join, the club has rules. Once you join, you can actually discuss the rules, you can influence the rules, but you cannot really operate outside of the rules. And the third point is Brexit. Brexit is the term that has been used for the UK, the British exit of the European Union. So that's what we mean by Brexit. In 2016, there was a referendum. It was not a binding referendum. Non-binding meaning that the result did not have legal implications, but the government said, the government of the UK, whatever the majority decide, will go with that. And they did. So from 2016 to 2019, there were negotiations between the UK and the EU. And now in 2020, the UK finally left the European Union. 2021, the UK is, for the full year, for the first time since the 1970s, outside. So then in the next slide, I want to advance a couple more arguments about what the EU is. I mentioned it's an IO. It's a technical term that we use in international law. It's an international organization. And this is what we call a multilateral organization. Multilateral means it's made by different countries, by different states, as opposed to unilateral, which means one state goes solo. Bilateral, two states working together. Multilateral means really more than two states. How many? Well, that really varies on the basis of each organization. The United Nations, for example, is an organization made up by almost 200 countries. The EU is made up of 27. It was 28 until last year. Now it's 27 with the departure of the UK. And the definition of a state, a country in international relations and international law is very simple. It's really the highest political authority. It's a political community that takes no orders from anybody else. It has the highest degree of independence and sovereignty. So I want to call your attention to the concept of sovereignty, state sovereignty. And when I talk about states here in international relations, we don't mean Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois. We mean countries. So the US would be a country, a state under international law. So I'm going to clarify that. So states are sovereign. That's a principle of international law that's been enshrined by the Treaty of Westphalia going back into the 17th century. That's where the modern system of international law was created. And international law is based on the principle that all states are equal before the law and all states are independent and sovereign. International organizations are a creation of the 19th century, fully developed in the 20th century. And those are unions of states by which states agreed to give up different spheres of sovereignty and empower this organization to act on the behalf of the group. It's collective action. So by joining this group, you agree that you're going to be working with others. You're going to pool resources. So there's benefits to membership, and that's why they're created. But you also have costs and obligations. What that means is that if you empower this organization to do things for you, then you're not going to do those things. So that is also incredibly important. So states collaborate, states cooperate, sometimes disagree, but when it comes to the EU, once they reach an agreement on what to do, they tell the EU, now go do it, and the EU does it. So there's different benefits. Couple of benefits are wrote into my slide, and I want to call your attention to transaction costs. What that means is that states agree to share the costs of doing things. And by sharing those costs, that means that the cost per person, per capita, go down. So we call this economic efficiency. And that is very important because the idea here is, let me give you an example. The European Union buys food from other countries, but any food that comes into the European Union has to comply with European health standards. What that means is that the EU reserves the right to send inspectors to other countries outside of the EU to see if they actually comply with European Union health rules. If every country of the EU had to do that, that means they would have to send 27 different food inspectors to, say, the US, Canada, or Mexico. But by delegating that power to the EU, only one goes. They basically observe that American meat producers comply with European rules. They stamp a seal, they give the permit to that American company and say, you comply with EU rules, you can export your meat to the EU. And that means that you save a lot of time, you save a lot of money, you save a lot of labor. And that means that the cost of that American meat is going to be cheaper in the EU because only one inspector gets paid instead of 27. So let's go to the next slide. So, why was the EU created? It wasn't just to police what Americans put in their meat. It was created for more than that. It was created after the Second World War in the 1950s to achieve peace in Europe. And that is very important. That was the first reason why the EU was created, to try to bring peace between the Germans and the French. It was also created to achieve security in the continent. Not only that the French and the Germans wouldn't go to war again, but also that they would work together to prevent third parties from invading them. The EU was also created to promote democracy. After the Second World War, it was believed that by locking Germany and Italy into the UK, into France, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Belgium, the original founders, that democracy in countries such as Germany and Italy that suffered under fascism would actually be stronger because they would be cooperating with more established democracies such as the French. Also to promote human rights. Human rights are sanctioned in European rules. No country can join the EU if they don't put human rights at the very top of their legal system. So to prevent the Holocaust from happening again, to prevent further violations of human rights, to prevent genocide, the EU was also created, locking again the gross violations of human rights into this common area. To also achieve economic prosperity, the war was devastating. France and Germany fought 3 devastating wars between the 1870s and 1945. So the reason behind the creation of the European Union, well, the European Union and its antecedents, the organizations that came before, was to try to get Germany and France to save money from going to war, and instead of investing in weapons, that they would invest in roads, they would invest in infrastructure, they would invest in education. And finally, to respect the rule of law. That's a major principle. One of the arguments here is that the reason why Germany and France went to war is because they didn't trust one another, they didn't trust what they did. So by actually creating an organization that sets rules that all countries have to comply, if Germany and France follow those rules, they will build trust and eventually will live peacefully and predictably, which is very important. The main thing you want to predict is that the neighbor is not going to walk in unexpectedly. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. I want to on this slide, I built a little bit more on who are in the room from the beginning, and I do this to point out that the UK was not. If you look at the second point on this slide, I have Belgium, France, Germany, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. Those are the 6 original founding members. They decided to work together with a very significant move. They created the coal and steel community and a nuclear Euratom, a nuclear agency. The reason for that is because coal and steel were the major raw materials used for the production of weaponry. So what Germany, France, and the other 4 members agreed to was to actually give up control of their coal and steel industries to this new joint organization called the Coal Steel Community, on the grounds that the Germans could not do anything with the coal and steel without the approval of the French, and vice versa. And by doing that, they would build trust. Eventually, that sphere of sovereignty, transferring control of coal and steel and nuclear energy to this European organization, spilled over. We call this concept spillover effect. When something works well, then the members say, why don't we just do the same thing in additional areas? So there was a spillover effect by which the member countries said, let's try to create economic cooperation. Let's create a common market. Let's create a common currency. Let's create a labor union. So all of these things spilled over from the success of previous experiences. So let's go to the next slide. So we're going to go through this really quickly. So this is just an overview of how what we call the European Union grew from the original coal and steel community. In 1952, we have these 6 original members, the Benelux countries, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, along with Germany, France, and Italy. The 6 welcome more members. We see, if we move on to the next slide, we go on to see that in 1973, the UK decided to join, and with the UK came Denmark and Ireland, 2 countries whose economies were very dependent on trade from the UK. The UK was hesitant to join originally. After World War II, the British intended to join the coal and steel community, but then they developed cold feet. By the 1960s, when they realized this was a really good idea, the European countries were actually building back. They tried to join, but they were vetoed by France, who saw the UK as a puppet of the US. And the French vetoed, particularly Charles de Gaulle, the General Charles de Gaulle. But when he left power, his successor decided to invite the British in, and with the UK came Ireland and Denmark. If we move on to the 1980s, in the 1980s, what we see is Greece joining in 1981, and in 1986, let's go to the next slide, is Spain and Portugal. That's when I joined the European Union. I'm originally from Spain. I actually do remember this. This was a huge thing when I was a boy, because everybody told us that, you know, having grown up in post-Franco Spain, you know, Francisco Franco was a fascist dictator that ruled Spain until the 1970s. And in the 1970s and 80s, many Democrats in Spain saw the European Union as an anchor into a democratic sphere. The European Union represented a progressive, democratic Europe, and it was the best antidote against far-right fascism. That was the thinking at the time. So what we see in the 1980s is Greece, Portugal, and Spain joined. The 3 countries share something in common, and this was hailed as a success of Europe. The 3 were run by right-wing military dictatorships, on and off since World War II until the 1980s. And this was hailed as a success of the European integration process, because countries in Southern Europe were actually wanting to join into a sphere of democracy and prosperity. The success continued into the 1990s. The 1970s, 80s, and 90s in particular were hailed as a success. In 1990, East Germany joined really quickly after the collapse of the Eastern Bloc. But then we move on to the next slide, and we see that by the mid to late 1990s, we see neutral countries that were officially neutral during the Cold War, Sweden, Finland, and Austria join. And if we move on to the next slide, then we see something amazing happen here. We see countries that were under Soviet control during the Cold War became members by the 2000s. And that was also considered a big success of the European project, because countries that were run by communists, communists under US influence for many, many decades, actually chose democratically to join the European Union. We have a couple of exceptions there. Malta, we see Malta at the bottom of the screen, and we see Cyprus. They were not under Soviet control, but they were also, outside of the EU, and they realized this was working well, so they applied for membership. Let's keep going to the next slide. In the late 2000s, we see Romania and Bulgaria join. These were the poorest countries in Eastern Europe. So there was a big question mark, is the EU all about democracy, or is it just about welcoming the wealthy? When Romania and Bulgaria joined, the GDP per capita of these countries was below a third of the average for the EU. And that signaled that, if you agree to democracy, human rights, the rule of law, it doesn't matter how poor you are, you're in, and we'll work on the poverty issue through a number of cash transfers and a number of programs that the EU developed to transfer wealth from the rich to the poor. Let's move on to the next slide. This is the last country to join. That was Croatia in 2013. And 3 years after that, we have Brexit. So this raises a big question mark. Is this the end of the expansion of the EU? So let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to leave that question up in the air. Not really. We have all of these countries that actually have applied for membership. Iceland, Montenegro, Macedonia, Serbia, and Turkey. And there's a couple more countries that are very interested in membership. We have Ukraine. We all saw that Ukraine was in the midst of a war for a few years, but Ukrainian people are torn between membership in the EU and the Russian ethnic group, closer ties with Russia. So, but we do have a number of countries waiting in line. Turkey right now doesn't seem to be very interested because of Turkey's failure to comply with democratic clauses. The EU wouldn't let them in anyway. So, and Iceland has developed cold feet as well as a result of a number of crises. So, but their application is on the table. Let's move on to the next slide. So, how successful has the European Union been in terms of achieving its goal? Well, I'm going to argue very successful. Countries that are members have not fought more wars. We also see that there are very strong human rights guarantees. The legal system works very well. People who have their human rights violated can go through the national system, and eventually they can appeal to the EU court. So in comparison to the US, you can appeal your way to the Supreme Court of your state and eventually to the Supreme Court of the US. In the European Union, there is another step. You can go all the way up to the Supreme Court of the European Union. So if your country fails you, you can always go to the EU. So democracy is strong, the rule of law is strong, and EU is one of the biggest markets in the world. After the UK left, last year it was worth $15 trillion. For comparison, it's about 3/4 of the US. We're talking about a major economy, the third largest in the world. And it also has a really, really high GDP per capita. Let's go to the next slide. That's factual information. I want to get into some of the critical arguments. But the EU is obviously not perfect. The EU has been facing a lot of challenges, and some of these actually led to Brexit. People on the left, my left here, believe that the EU is suffering from what the left calls democratic deficit. By adding a layer of bureaucracy, it's taking a step further away from the people, and the people cannot hold it accountable. It also lacks solidarity. Even though I mentioned earlier that the poor countries are less poor with respect to the wealthy ones, the gap is still there. It's narrower, but it's still there. So it's not the very egalitarian institution that the left would like it to be. On the other side, on the right, my right here, the conservatives claim that it stifles national identities. If you join the EU, you're no longer French, you're no longer German, you're no longer British, you're European, and they don't like that. And also the idea that the EU adds a layer of bureaucracy, which is true. It adds a layer of bureaucracy, but as I mentioned earlier, it takes away layers of bureaucracy in different countries. So one of the arguments that scholars are making is that if international organizations didn't add more than they take away, they would not exist. So that is an argument that the right is making, and there's definitely some grounds for that. But in the end, the argument does not take into consideration the fact that, by every layer of bureaucracy you transfer to the EU, you eliminate that one from France, from Germany, from Italy, from all the member countries. So there's lots of savings in terms of bureaucrats and politicians to be realized. And I think very few people would see that as a sad thing these days. Let's go to the next one. So What is in the future? So one of the arguments here is that the future is more of the same. If the EU has been very successful along all of these grounds, then why change? So let's move on to the next slide, because this doesn't really add anything new. So this is what the EU was created to do. And as I mentioned earlier, the EU is based on legislation that tells the EU what to do and what not to do. So that hasn't changed. But these important questions to ask. And on this slide, I want to go back to the questions that are raised by Dr. Latif in the piece that you read. So one of them is, what is the future of Europe and the UK right now after Brexit? What's going to happen to Scotland if the Scottish want to stay? And what's going to happen of the EU without Merkel? So let's go into the next slide. Let's start with the first one. What's going to happen to the future of the EU and the UK? So one important argument that is being put on the table today that was not so much during the referendum for Brexit. Let me just open up a parenthesis here. So one of the arguments is economic. What is the economic cost? Is Brexit going to make the British people wealthier? Is it going to make the Europeans wealthier? Is it going to make them poorer? Let me pause for a moment. When the referendum on Brexit was held, the big argument was about British national identity. It was about identity. It was identity politics that mattered, not so much what the economic costs were. The Leave campaign focused on the erosion of national identity, the arrival of immigrants, the invasion of foreigners. Foreigners are criminals. They're going to destroy the British way of life. Those are the arguments that were being put on the table. The Leavers were putting lots of ads on TV showing the Syrian crisis, people leaving Syria, trying to cross all across Europe. The argument was they're all coming to the UK. If we don't pull out, all of those refugees are coming here. There's 5 million people waiting to come. After that will come another 70 million. Very little was said about, whether in the end Brexit was going to make everybody better off or not. So to answer the question, let's think about what the UK and the EU mean to each other. So last year, into this month of January, the brunt of negotiations between the UK and the EU was what's going to happen to trade when the UK leaves. The EU is a trade union. What that means is that if you live in the EU and you produce whatever you want, you can sell it anywhere in the EU. You can sell your trade as a lawyer. You can sell your TV screen, your computer, your car, wherever you make it. If you don't like the place where you are, you can move to a different country. You have access to healthcare over there. Your kids can go to school. No matter where you are in the EU, you have freedom of movement. You can move your capital freely as well. So there is freedom of factors of production. There's freedom of capital, freedom of labor. There is freedom of trade. When the UK left the EU, what that meant is that there was no agreement on whether the UK and the EU would respect that. So let's look at the amount of wealth that trade generates between the two. If you go to focus on my slide, what you see there is that the trade of goods, that's the physical stuff, not the intangible brain power, is the physical stuff, the cars, the cucumbers, the tomatoes, all of those things that can physically have to be transferred across borders. Those account, trade between the UK and the EU account for 42% of the wealth exchange in hands between the UK and the EU. 42%. The rest of that, the remaining 58 is services. It means lawyers' fees. It means an architect that you hire in a different country and uses, their brains to, give you a drawing of a house, a professor that teaches a course online and you follow that class. That's services. On trade, the food, the legumes, the produce, all that stuff is 42%. And in terms of goods, the EU has a surplus. So if we just focus on trade of goods, the EU makes more money from the UK than vice versa. So the fact that the UK and the EU have actually agreed to keep the trade of goods open means that the UK will, as for now, continue to pay more to the EU than the EU will pay to the UK. Let's go to the next slide. The picture is a little different if you focus on services. The British are buying more songs, more films, more movies, more software, more lawyers, the Europeans are buying more of all that from the UK than vice versa, which means that the surplus for the UK has been 114 billion. This means that in a world of free trade between the UK and the EU, the UK wins more. There's more revenue coming in than leaving. However, the terms of Brexit have been finalized for trade of goods, not services, which means that as of now, the UK and the EU have not agreed to let each other's services cross borders, which means that this 114 billion surplus for the UK is now up in the air. And the EU has made it very clear that they want a slice of that pie, if not the entire pie altogether, or else they're not going to sign an agreement and the UK is going to be shut out. And then the UK gets to decide whether they like the deal or not. And that's why that agreement has not been finalized, and it will probably continue for the next 5-6 years. Who knows, maybe even more. So the British are not going to starve. There's a free trade deal for goods, which means they will continue to buy their produce from Southern Europe. But as far as services, that's a completely different story. Let's go on to the next slide. To make matters worse, there's a very sticky point here. Northern Ireland, there's a few of these, but I want to call your attention to Northern Ireland. And this goes beyond economics. The government of the Republic of Ireland made it very clear to the UK that if the UK left the EU, they would not sign an agreement allowing the UK to leave the EU without guaranteeing the unification of Ireland. So as you know, the tip of northeastern Ireland belongs to the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland. The Republic of Ireland is the rest. In 1998, there was what's known as the Good Friday Agreement, by which the parties at war, the parties engaged in the violence, agreed to stop the violence on the condition that the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic would not be policed, there would be no checkpoints, it would be open, so that you wouldn't even know you were crossing from one country to the other. By leaving the European Union, that created a big question. So what happens to that border? Every country of the EU had to agree to the terms of the agreement, and the Republic of Ireland made it very clear they would not sign an agreement on Brexit. They would not allow any agreement if the border was hard, if the border came back. So a compromise was reached. For the next 4 years, the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland will remain under European Union rules, even though, technically speaking, Northern Ireland is out of the UK. What that means is that right now the border between the European Union and the UK is on the Sea of Ireland. Any person from Northern Ireland or Ireland traveling across the border don't have to show a passport, don't have to file any paperwork. But anybody traveling from the UK, from England, Wales, or Scotland to Northern Ireland, they have to pass customs control. Anybody trying to sell something from England, Scotland, from Great Britain to Northern Ireland has to comply with European Union legislation, which means that now we have two parts of the UK under different rules. So this raises a very interesting question. And I have my last 3 points there basically are asking the 3 options that we have on the table right now. So this is a 4-year deal. What's going to happen after those 4 years? Will Northern Ireland remain the same it is today under EU law, but under UK political rule? Another option is that Northern Ireland will vote to go for full UK membership, leave the EU, and then build a border with the Republic of Ireland, which is a violation of the Good Friday Agreement. And President Biden said very clearly that as a person of Irish descent, he would oppose that, and the US would not support that option. The US actually is one of the observers in the agreement. The American Irish community really lobbied for this. And the third option is that Northern Ireland will choose to break away from the UK and join the Republic of Ireland, which is an unfulfilled dream of many Irish people, the full unification of the Ireland. So if you read the British press and the Irish press, that is now an option on the table right now. So what's going to happen in the next 4 years? How the Brexit rules are being negotiated will determine what's going to happen. But this is one of the big questions to follow in terms of British politics. What's going to happen to the UK? Is this the end? You know, Northern Ireland might be the first part of the UK to leave the Union. So let's go to the next slide. And what's going to happen to the UK after, a deal is finalized for services as well as goods? Is there anything beyond economics? Yes, there is, and this is the good news. The UK and the EU have agreed to remain close, good partners. They agreed that they need each other economically, but most importantly, they will cooperate in terms of security. By that we mean anti-terrorism. They still commit themselves to help each other in case of a foreign invasion, so that's not going to change. Environmental, issues such as climate change, both the EU and the UK will continue to work together. Even though the UK has left the EU, the UK still working with the EU in terms of climate policy. The UK and EU will continue to share and collaborate for the development of new science, new technology, and they will work very closely together beyond Europe to try to bring peace, stability, promote democracy and rule of law around the world. So that's the good news. That's not on the table. It's an agreement. It's a good deal. Let's go on to the next slide. And we're getting close to the end here. So whether Northern Ireland stays with the UK or goes to, joins in with the Republic of Ireland, what about Scotland? So Scotland is another question mark. The independence sentiment has increased in Scotland. In the mid-teens, Scotland held a referendum on independence and failed by about 3-4 points. But the sentiment today is very different. 49% of Scots polled in the last month claimed that they would actually vote for Scotland to leave the UK and join the European Union. There's no single region of Scotland, and I really emphasize this, where Leave won. Every single region of Scotland voted remain in the EU. So this is a big significant difference. Scotland has a very international foreign policy. The Scottish, there's 30 million people of Scottish descent living around the world, and Scotland believes that they belong in a global community of Scottish people. They're very prominent in terms of exports. They export lots of oil and natural gas to the rest of the world. Whiskey, there's a number of signature Scottish products, and they believe they don't need the UK. They certainly don't need the EU. And one of their biggest markets is the European Union, so they don't want to compromise that. The key here is what's going to happen with the 10% that remain undecided. 49%, almost half, would vote for independence. 41% remain, 10% undecided. The more important question, however, is what are the chances that this referendum might be held? And actually, they're very, very slim. And so I think for better or worse, Scotland is in the UK in the long run, and they'll have to find a way to reach some kind of accommodation. An independence referendum would require approval by the British Parliament, and there's no political will in London to allow for that. So let's go to the next slide. And this is the question that is not really well addressed in the reading that I will talk about very briefly. So Ms. Latif asks the question, what's the future of Europe in terms of who's going to lead Europe? Angela Merkel has really distinguished herself for her pro-European views, has exercised incredible leadership, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes eagerly. So the big issue here, I think, has to do with the fact that during Brexit negotiations, one of their strategies of the UK was to divide and rule. They courted independent countries of the European Union to try to get support for a Brexit deal that they liked. And by breaking up the unity of the EU, they believed they would be able to get the EU to give them lots of concessions. That did not happen. And what that suggests is that, one, members of the EU are very, very, very much scared of what happened in the UK, and they don't want that to happen in their own countries. Secondly, what that means also is that countries trust that the EU does a fairly good job negotiating on everyone's behalf. It's a lot simpler having one-on-one negotiations rather than the UK and 27 on the other. And I think what's really important here as well is that the EU and its members made it very clear to the UK that if you leave, it's going to hurt. We're not going to give you a sweet deal. Breaking up is hard to do, and you're going to be sorry that you did it, because they want it to hurt so that no other countries decide to, run for the door. So let's go to the next slide. So what's in the future? And I want to add here that the US is very, very important as well. And the US is important for a number of reasons. Since the early 20th century, President Wilson made it very clear that he wanted Europeans to come together and work together to build a strong European community on the rule of law, on the protection of democratic clauses, human rights, etc. All of those things that I have on the screen: peace and security, democracy, human rights, economic prosperity, multilateralism, again, working through international organizations, not individually, and the rule of law. That was clearly promoted by President Truman, Eisenhower, and if you really go down, President Kennedy made a big deal about this, Presidents Reagan, Bush father and son. So maybe the only change was with President Trump, who wasn't very keen on the European Union, but the US has been a staunch supporter of European integration. It makes negotiations with Europe a lot simpler. Who do you call? Was a question that Ronald Reagan asked. Who do I call when I want to talk to Europe? So call the European Union is the answer right now. And also, the Americans believe that by having the Europeans work with one another, not only do they actually keep each other from killing themselves, they keep the Americans from having to intervene. And if instead of wars, they actually, work on building their economies, they buy American goods. And that's good for the Americans as well. So for that reason, the US is very involved. And while President Trump was a little bit lukewarm about European integration, he wasn't particularly, keen to help, his fellow nationalist friend Boris Johnson in terms of Brexit. Early in his tenure as president of the US, he kind of signaled that he really welcomed Brexit and he was going to work with President Boris Johnson. So Johnson reached out to Trump as soon as he took the reins. And he said that he wanted a free trade deal with the US to actually show it to the European Union as a bargaining chip. And President Trump told him, you're too little now. I don't really care. What do you have to offer? Boris Johnson found that incredibly offensive. I mean, it actually came back to hurt him, and it actually increased the bargaining power of the EU. And the EU said, see? All right, so let's go to the next slide. And here I'd like to conclude by saying that what happens between the European Union and the UK is really serious, not just for the British and the European people, but also for the world. The European Union has actually had followers around the world. NAFTA, if you will, for better or worse, was inspired by the European project. There's lots of regional blocks around the world: the Caribbean community, the Andean community, the Central American Common Market, Mercosur in South America. There is also the West African Union, the Arab Union, the South Asian. So you can go on and on and on. There's lots of organizations that were inspired by the EU. Another important argument here is that many scholars of international relations see the EU as a major world rule entrepreneur. One of the most aggressive policies of the EU is to try to bring countries in the world together around all of those principles that I emphasized earlier: protection of democracy, human rights, rule of law, economic collaboration. The Europeans don't tell countries what to do. They don't like to invade countries, but they will tell countries, if you want to trade with me, we'll buy your products, but you have to build stronger democracies. You have to build the rule of law in your country. You have to do all of those things. Some people call this European diplomatic imperialism intervention. And the question is how much of that is going to continue with Brexit. My answer is that probably will remain the same. and that the UK will be a reluctant participant in some of that and a willing participant in some other parts. So for better or worse, the EU and the UK decided to part ways. Breaking up, it's hard to do, but I think they're going to remain fairly close friends. So they're going to be a good ex for each other. So on that note, I'll turn it over to Tim, and I'll take any comments, questions, or suggestions that there might be for me, and I can go back and elaborate on any of those points. We can elaborate on anything else. And so, Tim, you take it away now.
I don't know if I'll exactly take it away, but I'll include myself back into the picture. Thank you very much, Professor Toral, for that great lecture on the subject. I've been scrolling it throughout the entire time you've been talking. Underneath you, if anyone does have any questions or comments, just type them into your comments, whether you're watching them on, whether you're watching this on Facebook or on YouTube, and it'll come through to me. So if anyone has any questions or comments for Professor Toral, now is an excellent time to ask them. We don't have any as of yet. It was a very, good lecture, very straightforward. Hopefully we'll have some questions or comments that come through, but as of right now, we don't. So in your opinion, where do you think this will ultimately lead? Will the UK always be a part of, will they always be separate? Or do you think eventually they'll rejoin? Where do you think it's going to go?
Okay, so let me answer your question. And Laura Conkling asked a really interesting question that some people are asking. So Laura, I will address your question in a minute. So where is this going? So as I said earlier, the UK and the EU are, think about this as divorce. They're breaking up on something that is very small. And once they break up, they realize there was probably a mistake. It wasn't the best thing to do. So they'll try to make up for it, and they'll be, a good, close, and they will collaborate. So the EU will try to make the UK realize that if you leave, you're going to have to pay. But the EU at the same time doesn't want the UK to walk away. So what they probably will do is that they will strike a deal with the UK similar to what they have going on with Norway, with Switzerland, and with other countries in Europe that are not members of the EU. They will say, we'll let you be a quasi-member, but that means that you have to pay. And that was one of the arguments used by the leavers to claim that, the European Union is really taking our money. We're getting nothing out of it. So the EU will say, well, guess what? You're going to have to pay. But if you do, we'll take your views into consideration and we'll work with you. The biggest loss for the UK here is that by leaving the EU, any company that wants to sell anything to the EU has to comply with European rules. And I emphasize that this is very important. The EU is the biggest market for the UK. But by leaving, the UK does not have the power to draft those rules. And that's a big difference. Whenever new health rules, labor standards, environmental standards were negotiated in the EU, they were actually negotiated. And countries could say, let's just not enforce that in 2 years. Give me a 2-year grace period because my economy is just not ready. And countries help one another. The UK has given that away, which means there'll be rule takers. And in part, they are going to be a de facto legal colony of the EU. They just lost their power to influence the rules that their companies are going to have to comply with. But other than that, I really see them collaborating. And the EU will probably tell the UK, okay, you go out there, tell them this was a mistake. We'll give you a grace period after all. We just want to make sure that, you ask for redemption. Okay, so Tim, do you read the questions or do you want me to read them and answer them?
I can read the questions. I just, it was Laura's question, which was good, was very similar to my question, so I just put it up on the screen. In addition to some people thanking you for such a clear history and explanation of the EU, we had another question come in from James. What about the currency?
That's right. Okay, so on Laura's question, there is, there's a point that I want to emphasize that is important. Will the UK ever apply for membership again? The UK government said not in a generation. This is a very important decision. We're not going to spend 5 years negotiating something that then we're going to reverse 5 years later just because we think it's a bad idea. So one of the important things to keep in mind is that people under 40 voted to remain in the EU. People over 40 voted overwhelmingly to leave. So this is a big deal for young people. Young British people love the idea of going to study abroad in France, Germany, travel around, go party in Spain and Italy. No questions asked. That's over. That's over. They're stuck in the UK. They can work in the UK, but it's going to be very hard for them to go abroad, study, or work in other countries. And when the referendum was held, the politicians said, what you decide is important. We're not going to do one of these in a generation. So no going back, at least for 25 years. What about the currency? Well, the currency, the EU, the euro, the UK was not on the euro. One of the characteristics of the European Union is that when you join the club, you negotiate the rules and you can exempt yourself from complying with rules that you don't like. So if you're in, you can say, I'm going to join the currency, so I'll use the euro, or you can say, I'm not going to do that. And the UK joined the European Union, but they stayed out of the euro. They decided to keep the pound sterling. So they had their pound sterling, they left, they keep it, no change there at all. Some countries, for example, Germany, France, Italy, I really mentioned those, the Benelux countries, the regional members, gave up their currencies because they believed that using the euro as a single currency was a symbol of unity. So they wouldn't go to war. It would also be a very strong currency. Countries in the periphery of Europe, normally the smaller countries in Scandinavia, like Denmark, Sweden, the UK, decided to keep their currency because they believed it was a sign of national identity that they didn't want to see go away. The UK kept its currency, and the currency was just the way it was before. In countries such as Denmark, the currency remains, but it's pegged to the euro, what that means really is that they're on the euro, but when you go to the store, you're using the krone, the Danish krone. So, but people will take euro as well. It's just about the same. That's not the case in the UK.
Well, thank you for catching that point in Laura's question. That I didn't mean to gloss that over, Laura, but that was a very good point and very interesting. Also, James, good question about the currency. Does anyone else have any questions that's following along? Because we have a little bit of time left, and it would be, we have an expert here. We should ask questions. So let's hold on just a couple seconds. I will mention that if anyone is interested in getting the publication, the companion publication that goes with Great Decisions, we should have that hopefully within the next couple of days. So just give us a call at 920-686-3010. We'll treat it like curbside service. You order the book. You let us know when you get here. We'll bring it out to you. We'll exchange an envelope that you'll leave on the table with the $15 in check or cash, and you will walk away with a lovely companion piece for Great Decisions 2021. Also, I just wanted to point out that if anyone wanted the PowerPoint presentation that Professor Toral had running this evening, just email me. My email address is scrolling at the bottom of the screen right now. Email me your request for the PowerPoint presentation, and I will get back to you. So I don't see any more questions coming in. It seems as if you must have told everyone everything they needed to know already. So thank you very much for your lecture this evening. Oh, wait. And Laura just wanted to quickly say thank you very much for the presentation. So interesting to hear the background and also the perspectives for the future. And that sums it up very well.
Yes. One more thing before we go that is actually being negotiated. It's about the people. So we're talking about the economy. We're talking about the law. So what about the people? For example, in my country, Spain, there's about 500,000 British people living, and there's about 250,000 Spanish people in the UK. Will they be deported? Of that 500,000 people, 2/3 of them are retirees. The snowbirds who spent winter in Spain, and for them, this is a drama. They sold everything they had in the UK to move to Spain forever. So by leaving the UK, what that means is that they have no social security in Spain. And they have no insurance because they didn't make plans for this. So they're no longer locals. They cannot vote in local elections because they left the EU. And they have no power to influence local politics. So this is a tragic drama for millions of British retirees that are living in Spain, in Italy, in Portugal. So this is what one of the issues that is being negotiated right now. So what, in this case, Spain did, Spain said, don't worry, we'll give you a Spanish passport if you want, but if you don't, we will extend your residency for as many years as you want, and nothing's going to change. You'll still have access to Spanish social security. In exchange, the UK say, we'll do that to the Spanish people living in the UK. They can choose to stay if they want to stay. If they are over 65, we'll give them an automatic renewal of their visa. If they're under 65, they'll have to become British citizens, at least residents. So there's a few things going on, but the point is that this is not to be taken lightly. There's lives at stake. I mean, for the British retirees living in the EU, this was a drama because by January 1st, they lost legally access to social security. They even lost the right to reside in the countries where they own their only home. So the countries where they live could confiscate it and say, well, you no longer have the papers, leave, you're undocumented. Wow. We don't need to build a wall because you're an island, but we're going to dump you there and then you swim back. Well, that didn't happen. And that's why I mean, there's good faith there. So there's another question on Turkey. Turkey joining the EU. Turkey is the perennial candidate. Turkey did want to join the EU, but right now with President Erdogan of Turkey violating human rights, violating democratic clauses, there is no way in the world Turkey is going to be invited into the EU. So there is an expectation that Turkey will join at some point, but the time is really not now. Getting COVID-19 vaccines, fascinating question as well, for a number of reasons. Because the vaccines were the result of collaboration of scientists from the UK and Europe. So then what do? Who actually owns it? You know, AstraZeneca is a company of joint ownership, British and Swedish. That means European Union and British. So who actually owns those vaccines? You know, Pfizer is an American drug company, but the drug was developed by a German company that has a factory in Belgium that signed an agreement to sell the vaccine to the UK. And they want to honor that agreement, but they have other countries in the EU wanting it too. So those are really important issues. And that's being discussed right now. You know, the EU and the UK are deciding who gets the vaccine, we all developed it together. In the end of the day, we have to divide up the doses and distribute them. What they do in Europe is by population, similar to what we're doing here in the US.
Would it be possible to go back to Nancy's question? You answered the Turkey half of it, but is Greece on the good side or in the good graces of the EU with their immigration policy? Is that affecting anything?
Yes, Greece has changed government since the immigration crisis, and that also helped. After the financial crisis in the 2000s, the far right grew a lot in Greece, and they took over the government. So we had, for the first time since the Second World War, some people call them the fascists are back. So that didn't go very well with the European Union. This ties in with the question on Hungary, Poland, two countries that are sliding, towards right-wing, illiberal nationalism. So what the EU does with these countries is that they actually tie EU funding to a score sheet. You have to comply with the protection of human rights, democracy, etc. So while negotiating the budget of the EU, who's going to pay what and who's going to get what, Hungary and Poland were told, if you do not keep your legislature independent, if you do not respect professional appointments to the Supreme Court, if you harass the opposition, you're not getting any money this year. And that's how they comply. So eventually Greece and Poland and Hungary complied. So there's give and take. The EU could do better in that regard because they've been working on the expectation that every country will comply. But Hungary and Poland have actually shown that they don't necessarily until they're pushed.
Another good question just came in. How does the EU work with China? Thank you, John.
Yes, another interesting question. Differently from the US, the EU tends to work well with China economically. They need each other economically. They're both important markets for each other. China needs a lot of high-tech goods coming from Europe. Europe has a very good reputation internationally for being a strong democracy, rule of law, collaboration, human rights. And the EU is using that as clout to negotiate with China. So the European Union countries denounce violation of human rights in China, and the Chinese don't like that. So it's always a game of give and take. The EU will express concerns, they will make it obvious, and then China will threaten to hold the respirators, the masks, that happened during the pandemic. So there was a lot of give and take regarding that. But they found a way to accommodate, and it seems to be working fairly well. So China already expects that the EU will complain about their human rights record to the point that they say, well, they will complain anyway, no matter what we do. So, okay, we're bad. Now let's talk business. And the European approach is, yes, you're bad. Glad you acknowledge that. I hope you do better next year. Now let's talk business. So they have their own local constituencies, but in the end, they're very pragmatic.
And Cecilia had a question, but you pretty much answered it when you were talking about how they deal with how the EU deals with countries with their check cards, that they have to meet certain standards to comply, and you did meet that already. Hopefully, Cecilia, the Professor Toral answered that. If not, feel free to ask again. There's a question that Laura had that I'm not going to put up just because, because it's more about, it's not for you specifically, Professor Toral. I just want to let anyone know, Laura specifically, that this presentation will be available online as soon as it ends. Honestly, just give it a couple minutes, and both on Facebook and YouTube, this will be archived. So you can watch this anytime you want. And I am going to be creating a playlist for Great Decisions 2021. Professor Toral will be leading the pack, as he was the first one in this year. #1 with a bullet. And yes, this will be available online just shortly afterwards. We've already had a couple requests already, Professor Toral, for your PowerPoint. So thank you for giving me permission to send it out to people.
No problem.
Are there any more questions? You'll be able to get the companion book later in the week. If you would like the PowerPoint presentation, just email me at tgodzinski@manitowoc.org, and I will send you the PowerPoint presentation. As there doesn't seem to be any questions coming in anymore, I think we'll wrap this up for the evening. Thank you very much, Professor Toral of Beloit College, for coming in. Sorry you're feeling a little bit under the weather. Hopefully it's nothing more than a little bit of a cold, and
I hope so.
as do I, and I'm sure everyone else does as well. Next week, tune in for week 2 of Great Decisions 2021, where the topic will be, is globalization coming to an end, or is it just moving into a new phase? And Professor Elise Cohen of UWGB will be addressing that topic. And for myself, I'm Professor Toral. And Nancy Slattery says, thank you very much for being the first one in the group. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. Good night, everyone. Have a great night. You can watch us again if you would like in just a couple of minutes. Have a great night, everyone. And it's going to be another great year of great decisions. Have a good night.
Thank you for having me. Be safe.
Oh, definitely. You as well.
Bye.
Bye now.